silk and crystal beading and 29-year-old certainty. I watched from my position near the bar, not quite mingling, not quite hiding, while waiters in crisp black vests navigated around me with trays of champagne that cost more per glass than I spend on groceries in a week. Hey family, before this story begins, I want you to do something real quick. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your comments fuel these stories. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button because what happens next will leave you speechless. If you love intense mafia romance, powerful male leads, emotional slow burn love stories, and unforgettable twists, this story will keep you hooked until the very last second. The Blackstone Hotel ballroom in downtown Chicago was everything a high society wedding should be. Glittering chandeliers casting warm light across polished marble. Sweeping staircases. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Chicago River and the city's evening skyline. The kind of venue that whispered wealth, legacy, and a world I no longer quite belonged to. I'd left Ethan with my sister Emma 3 hours ago, my 6-year-old son's confused face still fresh in my mind. He'd wanted to come, to wear the little navy suit we'd found at the consignment shop, to see Miss Rebecca get married like in the princess movies. But Emma, bless her protective heart, had convinced me otherwise. Formal weddings and first graders didn't mix well, she'd said. Better to keep Ethan at her house where he could play video games with his cousins and avoid the questions that would inevitably be directed at me. Questions I didn't want to answer in front of my son. The questions had started the moment I'd walked through the ballroom doors at 6:45. Alone. 30 years old, single mother, elementary school teacher, wearing an emerald green dress I'd bought 3 years ago that still looked elegant if you didn't notice the slightly dated cut or the careful mending along one seam. Marcus's fiancée Veronica had glided past me in the receiving line, her designer cocktail dress probably worth more than my monthly rent, her diamond engagement ring catching the light like a tiny disco ball on her perfectly manicured hand. Her smile had been razor-sharp and socially acceptable. "Dorothy, I didn't realize you were still in Chicago. Marcus mentioned you'd moved to the suburbs. Something about teaching at a public school?" The pause before public school had been just long enough to make it sound like she was saying maximum security prison. Washington Elementary, I'd confirmed, keeping my voice pleasant. 4th grade. It's very rewarding. I'm sure it must be. Veronica's tone suggested she found the concept of finding reward in a teacher's salary deeply foreign. And you came alone tonight? No +1? Rebecca mentioned something about a complicated situation? Code 4, where's the father of your child, and why doesn't he love you enough to be here? I'd smiled tighter. Just me tonight. Ethan's with family. Marcus had appeared at Veronica's elbow then, my ex-boyfriend of 7 years ago, the man who'd given me an ultimatum when I discovered I was pregnant, terminate the pregnancy or lose him. I'd chosen my unborn son. He'd chosen his career trajectory and eventually Veronica, whose family owned a commercial real estate empire. He'd looked at me with something between pity and satisfaction. Like I was a problem he'd successfully avoided, a bullet dodged, a cautionary tale he could point to when explaining to Veronica why they should wait for children until after his partnership was secured. Jessica, he'd said, using the nickname only he had ever used, the one I'd asked him to stop using 6 years ago. You look, well. Teaching must agree with you. Translation, you look exactly like someone who works too hard for too little money and raises a child alone. I'd excused myself before I could say something that would confirm every assumption they'd already made about me. That I was bitter. Struggling. Regretful. A woman whose life had taken a wrong turn and never recovered. So here I stood, near the bar but not quite at it, holding a champagne flute I'd accepted from a passing waiter but hadn't sipped. Watching couples dance and laugh and exist in a world where they belonged to someone, where they were chosen, where they weren't quietly pitted by every person who knew their history. Rebecca's college friends clustered near the windows, discussing vacation homes and wedding registries. My former sorority sisters, the ones who'd slowly stopped inviting me to things after Ethan was born, stood by the gift table, probably comparing whose husband made more money. Marcus's friends from his investment firm held court near the bar's opposite end, their conversation punctuated by the kind of laughter that came from expensive scotch and expensive educations. And I stood alone. 30 years old. Single mother. Elementary school teacher making $48,000 a year in a city where that barely covered rent and childcare. Wearing a 3-year-old dress and shoes I'd resold twice. Trying very hard not to check my phone to see if Emma had texted about Ethan, trying very hard not to calculate when I could politely leave, trying very hard not to become the pathetic single mother everyone already thought I was. You've been standing alone for 20 minutes. The voice came from behind me, low, accented, and impossible to ignore. That seems like a waste of a beautiful woman at a wedding full of mediocre men. I turned. The man standing there was dangerous. That was the first word that came to mind, followed immediately by magnetic and then trouble. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out a charcoal suit that had definitely been custom-tailored. Dark hair slicked back from a strong, angular face. A jaw that could cut glass. And eyes that were an unusual green-brown hazel, the kind that seemed to see through every defense I'd spent years constructing. He looked like he'd walked out of a movie about beautiful, morally questionable men who broke hearts and possibly laws. I prefer standing alone to making awkward small talk with people I used to know, I managed, proud that my voice came out steady. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. Then we have something in common. I also prefer standing alone. But watching you pretend that champagne glass is a shield made me reconsider my preferences. I glanced down at the flute I'd been gripping like a lifeline. It's not a shield. It's a prop. There's a difference. Is there? He moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne, something dark and woody with undertones of gunpowder. No, that couldn't be right. You're Dorothy. Rebecca's friend from college. The one who teaches children and raises a son alone. My spine stiffened. You've been asking about me? I make it a practice to know who's in any room I enter. His eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. Especially when someone as interesting as you is being deliberately ignored by people who should know better. Interesting. I tasted the word. That's a polite way of saying complicated. I don't do polite. His hand extended. Oscar Bodrov. I'm here as an associate of the groom's family. Import-export business. I knew I should make an excuse. Should step away from this man who radiated danger and dark charisma in equal measure. Should return to my safe, lonely position by the bar and wait out the next hour until I could escape back to my real life. Instead, I took his hand. Dorothy Herzog. His grip was warm, confident, and lasted a fraction longer than socially necessary. I know who you are, Dorothy. The question is whether you're brave enough to stop hiding near this bar and let me show everyone in this ballroom that you're not alone. That you belong to someone they should think twice about dismissing. My breath caught. I don't belong to anyone. Not yet. Oscar's smile was predatory and somehow protective at once. But I'm very good at making people believe things that serve my purposes. And right now, my purpose is making sure that man watching you from across the room, the one with the guilty conscience and expensive suit, understands that you're not available for his pity or his judgment. I followed his gaze to where Marcus stood with Veronica, both of them staring at Oscar and me with expressions that ranged from shock to concern. "What are you proposing?" I asked carefully. "Dance with me. Let me introduce you to people as someone under my protection. Spend the next 2 hours proving to everyone here that you're not the cautionary tale they've decided you are." Oscar's voice dropped lower, intimate enough that only I could hear. "Pretend you're my wife, Dorothy. Let me show them what it looks like when someone chooses you." I should have said no. Should have recognized this for the dangerous proposition it was. Should have understood that accepting meant stepping into a world I knew nothing about with a man who was clearly far more than an import-export businessman. But standing there in my 3-year-old dress, watching Marcus whisper to Veronica while she shot me pitying looks, feeling the weight of every assumption and judgment pressing down on me. I made a choice that would change everything. "One dance," I said. "Then we'll see." Oscar's smile was devastating. "We'll see indeed." He offered his arm, and I took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath expensive fabric, feeling every eye in the ballroom turn toward us as we moved onto the dance floor. Behind us, I heard Veronica's stage whisper carry across the marble, "Who's that man with Dorothy?" And oh my God, Marcus, isn't that Oscar Bodrov? The one your firm refused to take as a client because of the rumors? I didn't hear Marcus's response. I was too busy trying to breathe as Oscar's hand settled at the small of my back, possessive, protective, and impossible to misinterpret. "Relax," he murmured against my ear as the music started. "I won't let you fall. That's a promise I always keep." And as we began to move together, as I felt the room's collective shock and curiosity and sudden reassessment, I realized I'd just agreed to dance with the devil. I just hoped I'd survive long enough to find out what he actually wanted in return. Oscar didn't ask if I wanted to dance. He simply guided me onto the polished marble floor with a hand at the small of my back that managed to be both gentle and utterly possessive. The placement was deliberate, low enough to be intimate, firm enough to make a statement. Every person watching understood immediately, I belonged to him now, at least for tonight. His movements were precise, controlled, the kind that came from years of training in far more than ballroom dancing. He led with absolute confidence, anticipating the music's rhythm before it shifted, steering us through the crowd of couples with practiced ease. I felt clumsy in comparison, a fourth-grade teacher who'd learned to waltz from YouTube videos versus a man who moved like violence and elegance were interchangeable skills. "You're thinking too hard," Oscar murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Just follow me. I won't let you stumble." Across the dance floor, Marcus stood frozen near the champagne fountain, watching us with barely concealed fury. Veronica's smile had gone brittle, her hand tight on his arm as she whispered something urgent. Whatever social calculation she was making, Oscar's presence had disrupted it completely. Rebecca's mother intercepted us when the song ended, her curiosity barely masked by social pleasantries. "Dorothy, darling, you didn't mention you were bringing someone." "And Mr. Bodrov. Oscar Bodrov." His handshake was brief but commanding. "I apologize for not RSVPing properly. Dorothy and I have been keeping things quiet." "How long have you two been seeing each other?" Her eyes assessed Oscar's expensive suit, the watch that probably cost more than my car. "For months," Oscar said smoothly, and I tried not to show my shock. "We met through a mutual business associate. Dorothy was consulting on an educational program my company sponsors." The lie was so specific, so casually delivered, that even I almost believed it. "And you have a son, Dorothy?" Oscar turned to me, and his expression softened in a way that seemed genuine. "Ethan, right? 6 years old? Dorothy mentioned he's reading at a 3rd grade level already. Remarkable for his age." My throat tightened. He'd researched me. New details about my child that weren't publicly available. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it felt oddly protective. Like he'd wanted to know everything about what mattered to me before approaching. "What business are you in, Mr. Bodrov?" Rebecca's mother pressed. "International import-export. Security consulting." Oscar's smile revealed nothing. "I help people solve problems that require discretion." It's not particularly interesting conversation for a wedding. The vagueness was deliberate, inviting speculation while offering no concrete details. Rebecca's mother excused herself quickly, and I watched her beeline toward Marcus's mother, no doubt to share the scandalous development. The evening continued in a blur of careful choreography. Oscar never left my side. His hand found the small of my back when we stood talking, his fingers laced through mine when we sat at a table he'd somehow commandeered despite not being on the seating chart. Other men gave us space, a subtle deference I didn't fully understand but felt in how conversations shifted when Oscar joined them. The chemistry between us was undeniable but threaded with something darker. I felt the predatory awareness in how he surveyed the room constantly, cataloging faces and exits. How his body angled slightly in front of mine when strangers approached. How his smile never quite reached those hazel eyes that missed nothing. When the reception finally wound down, Oscar escorted me outside where a black Mercedes waited, its tinted windows reflecting Chicago's streetlights like dark mirrors. A driver stood beside it, not a hired car service, but someone who clearly worked for Oscar permanently. "Mikhail will take you home," Oscar said, opening the back door. I hesitated at the curb outside my modest apartment building in Ukrainian Village, suddenly aware of the chasm between Oscar's world and mine. "Thank you. For tonight. For making them see me differently. This can be one night, or it can be more." Oscar's expression was unreadable in the amber streetlight. "But know this, I don't do anything halfway. If you accept my protection, Dorothy, it comes with consequences. People will notice. People will ask questions. And my world," he paused, choosing words carefully. "My world isn't safe." He handed me a card. Black cardstock, silver embossing. Just a phone number, no name. "Call me when you decide whether you're brave enough for what I'm offering." The Mercedes pulled away, and I stood on the cracked sidewalk clutching that card, knowing I'd already made my decision. I just wasn't sure if it was bravery or madness that made me want to call him right now. I woke to my phone vibrating like a seized engine against my nightstand. 47 text messages. 12 missed calls. 3 voicemails. All from people who'd attended Rebecca's wedding and apparently had spent their Sunday morning doing exactly what I'd hoped they wouldn't, researching Oscar Bodrov. Emma called for the 4th time before I finally answered, still groggy and disoriented. "Dottie, please tell me you're okay." "I'm fine." "Why wouldn't I be fine?" "Because I did some research on that man you were with last night." Her voice carried that particular tight quality that meant she was trying very hard not to panic. "That Oscar Bodrov. Dottie, there are rumors. Very serious rumors about his business connections. Import-export is apparently code for things that don't get imported or exported legally. Please tell me you're not actually involved with him." I sat up, suddenly awake. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that involve words like organized crime and Russian bratva and under federal investigation, but nothing ever sticks." Emma's breath hitched. "Please tell me last night was just a one-time thing. That you're not actually seeing him." "I barely know him, Em. He was being polite at a wedding. Men like that aren't polite. They're strategic." She paused. "Just be careful. Please. For Ethan's sake if not your own." Monday morning at Washington Elementary, I tried to focus on my lesson plans for the week's unit on the California Gold Rush, but my mind kept drifting to Oscar's card, still in my purse where I'd left it. 23 fourth graders would arrive in 40 minutes expecting me to teach them about westward expansion when all I could think about was whether Emma was right to be worried. Marcus appeared in my classroom doorway during lunch period, and I knew immediately something was wrong. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear, his expensive suit rumpled like he'd slept in it. "We need to talk." He closed the door behind him without asking permission. "About last night. About that man you were with. Oscar." I set down my sandwich. "His name is Oscar." "I know what his fucking name is, Dorothy." Marcus's language shocked me. He never cursed, considered it beneath him. "Do you have any idea who he actually is? Oscar Bodrov isn't some businessman. He's connected to the Russian Bratva. The kind of people who solve problems by making other people disappear. Permanently." I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt oddly defensive. "And how would you know that?" "Because my firm's compliance department flagged him 2 years ago when he tried to open accounts with us. We turned him down because we don't do business with suspected criminals." Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping. "People don't cross Oscar Bodrov, Dorothy. They don't cross him because the consequences aren't legal disputes, they're concrete and Lake Michigan. Why do you care who I spend time with, Marcus?" I stood, meeting his eyes. "You made it very clear 6 years ago that my choices were my problem alone. That I was my problem alone. Because you're the mother of my," he stopped himself, jaw working. "The child you chose to have. And I won't let you expose him to criminals just because some gangster paid attention to you at a wedding and made you feel special for 5 minutes. The cruelty in his voice was familiar, the same tone he'd used when delivering his ultimatum 6 years ago. Choose him or choose the baby. As if it had ever been a real choice. "Get out of my classroom, Marcus." "Dorothy. Get out." He left, and I sat alone among construction paper decorations and inspirational posters about growth mindsets, staring at the half-eaten sandwich I no longer wanted. That afternoon, after my students had been dismissed and the hallways had emptied, I pulled Oscar's card from my purse. Black cardstock. Silver numbers. A phone number that represented either salvation or damnation, and I wasn't sure which terrified me more. I should throw it away. Should forget the whole dangerous fantasy. Should return to my safe, lonely, predictable life where the biggest risk was whether I could afford new winter boots for Ethan. I dialed the number instead. Oscar answered on the first ring, his voice carrying dark amusement. "I was wondering how long it would take you to be brave." My hand trembled. "How did you know it was me?" "Because, Dorothy, I've been waiting for you to call since I left you on that sidewalk last night. And I'm not a patient man." The restaurant Oscar chose had no sign outside, just a discreet brass number on a Gold Coast brownstone door. Inside, exposed brick walls, candlelight, and tables spaced far enough apart that conversations remained private. The kind of place where menus didn't list prices because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford to be there. Everyone knew Oscar. The maitre d' greeted him by name. Our server appeared with wine I hadn't ordered, poured from a bottle that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Other diners glanced our way with expressions ranging from curiosity to carefully concealed fear. "I'm going to be honest with you because you deserve that, and because the alternative is worse." Oscar's directness caught me off guard. "My interest in you has drawn attention from people who look for weaknesses to exploit. You need to understand what that means." I set down my wine glass carefully. "Marcus said you're connected to the Russian Mafia." "Marcus oversimplifies." Oscar's expression didn't change. My family's business involves security, protection services, and facilitating transactions that require discretion. We operate in spaces where traditional law enforcement either can't or won't. That creates enemies, rival organizations, ambitious prosecutors, opportunists who think targeting civilians will give them leverage. The clinical language made it almost bearable. Almost. The moment I claimed you publicly at that wedding, you became a target, Oscar continued, his hazel eyes holding mine with uncomfortable intensity. Not immediately dangerous, but visible. People who want to hurt me now know you exist. That you matter to me. I don't matter to you. We barely know each other. Perception is reality in my world, Dorothy. And I made sure everyone at that wedding perceived you as mine. He leaned forward slightly. I can protect you. I have resources and people who are very good at keeping safe what belongs to me. But you need to decide if you're willing to accept that protection and what comes with it. My throat felt tight. And what comes with it? Me. Completely. Not as a fake boyfriend to save face in front of your ex. As someone who will ensure no one can touch you or your son ever again. As someone who expects loyalty in return for protection. His voice dropped lower. I don't offer this lightly, Dorothy. Once you're mine to protect, you're mine. That's not a metaphor. Before I could process that declaration, Oscar's phone vibrated against the table. He glanced at the screen and his entire demeanor changed, shoulders tensing, jaw tightening, eyes going cold in a way that made my stomach drop. We need to leave. Now. He threw cash on the table without counting it, his hand firm at my elbow as he guided me toward the exit. Outside, the black Mercedes waited, Mikhail already behind the wheel with the engine running. Oscar made calls in rapid Russian as Mikhail navigated through evening traffic with precision that suggested extensive training. I caught fragments, names that meant nothing to me except one, Kozlov. Victor. And then a word I recognized from teaching a Russian exchange student 2 years ago, shkola. School. What's happening? I demanded, fear overriding politeness. Oscar, what's wrong? He turned to me, and for the first time I saw genuine concern in those calculating eyes. A man was asking questions about Ethan at Washington Elementary today. During afternoon dismissal. Questions about his schedule, who picks him up, whether he has allergies. My people intervened before he could get answers, but Dorothy. Ice flooded my veins. Someone threatened my son? Someone scouted your son. To determine if he would make effective leverage. Oscar's hand covered mine, warm and solid and completely at odds with the violence in his voice. This is what I meant about consequences. The Kozlov Brotherhood knows I'm interested in you. They're trying to determine how interested. Whether you're worth using against me. My mind raced through impossible calculations. My teaching salary didn't cover private security. My apartment had a lock that could be kicked in by anyone determined. I had exactly $300 in savings, student loans I'd be paying until Ethan graduated high school, and a 6-year-old boy who depended on me to keep him safe. Tell me what I need to do, I said, and my voice sounded strange, steady when everything inside me was screaming. Oscar's smile was predatory and somehow reassuring. Pack bags for you and Ethan. Essentials for a week. Mikhail will take you to your sister's to get him while I make arrangements. Arrangements for what? You're moving into my penthouse tonight. Both of you. Under my protection, under my security, under my roof. His grip tightened on my hand. They wanted to know if you're worth using against me, Dorothy. I'm about to make it very clear that the answer is yes, and that touching you or your son means starting a war they can't win. Oscar's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a glass and steel tower in Streeterville, each level accessible only by private elevator that required both a key card and fingerprint scan. The security measures Dorothy only partially understood, cameras in every hallway, guards stationed at intervals who nodded respectfully to Oscar and assessed her with professional neutrality, doors that looked ordinary but felt heavy in ways that suggested reinforcement beyond standard construction. The space itself was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan, the water dark and endless under evening sky. Minimalist furniture in shades of charcoal and cream. Art on the walls that looked expensive in that understated way that meant it probably was. Everything pristine and carefully curated, the home of a man who valued control and precision. Ethan's eyes went wide the moment we stepped inside. "Mom, is this a hotel?" "It's Mr. Oscar's home," I said, still processing the scope of what I'd agreed to. "We're going to stay here for a little while." "Your room is upstairs," Oscar told Ethan, and something in his tone made me look at him sharply. He led us to the second level where a bedroom waited that was bigger than our entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A gaming setup with every console imaginable. Shelves already stocked with books about dinosaurs and cars. And in the center, a bed shaped like a race car, complete with working headlights. "You bought him a car bed?" I asked, torn between gratitude and overwhelm and the unsettling realization that Oscar had planned this, had known we'd end up here. I made inquiries about his interests. Oscar's response was matter of fact. He likes cars and dinosaurs. The room has both. I watched him crouch to Ethan's level, explaining seriously that we're having a special sleepover for a while because I'm helping keep you and your mom very safe. His voice carried authority but no condescension, treating my 6-year-old like someone whose understanding mattered. Ethan, naturally, had questions. A dozen of them, rapid fire, about the security cameras he'd spotted in the hallway and whether Oscar had a secret lair and if bad guys were really after us like in the movies. Oscar answered each one with surprising patience, never dismissing Ethan's concerns, never talking down to him. He treated my son's presence as important rather than inconvenient, and something in my chest cracked watching this dangerous man explain biometric locks to a first grader with complete seriousness. That night, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep in his race car bed, clutching the stuffed triceratops he'd brought from home, I found Oscar on the penthouse terrace. Chicago's lights spread below us like fallen stars, the lake a black void beyond the city's glow. I should have thanked him. Should have asked about the Kozlov threat and what happens next and how long we need to hide in his fortress. Instead I asked, "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Oscar was quiet for a long moment, his profile sharp against the city lights. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight I hadn't heard before. "My mother was a woman like you. Strong because she had no choice. Beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with money or status. She raised me alone after my father was killed, worked herself to exhaustion, and died believing she was a burden to the son she'd sacrificed everything for." He turned to look at me, and in the amber glow from the terrace lights, his face was half shadow, half revelation. "I saw you standing alone at that wedding, trying so hard to be invisible. And I saw my mother. I saw every woman who's been told her worth depends on a man's approval. Every mother who believes she failed because she chose her child over convenience. You deserved someone to stand with you, Dorothy. Consider this my way of giving my mother what I couldn't give her when she was alive." My throat tightened. "I'm not your mother, Oscar." "No," he agreed, stepping closer until I could smell cedar and gunpowder and something darker I still couldn't name. "You're not. Which is why protecting you has become about far more than redemption." Over the following week, I watched Oscar transform from the dangerous man who'd claimed me at a wedding into something I hadn't expected, a surprisingly capable father figure. He learned Ethan's routines with the same precision he apparently applied to everything else, the specific order of bedtime rituals that had to happen exactly right or Ethan couldn't settle. Bath first, then 2 stories, never 1, never 3, then the nightlight shaped like a moon positioned on the dresser, not the nightstand, and the door cracked exactly 3 inches. Not 2. Not 4. Oscar measured it the first night with actual calipers from his workshop. He discovered through trial and error that Ethan refused to eat vegetables unless they were hidden in pasta sauce, and by day 3 had hired a private chef who specialized in sneaking nutrition into meals without detection. He sat through 40 minutes of breathless 6-year-old commentary about Pokémon card rarity levels and type advantages, and somehow managed to look genuinely interested rather than grimly tolerant. "You're good at this," I observed one evening after Oscar had successfully negotiated Ethan into finishing his math homework before screen time, a battle I usually lost. "I'm good at understanding what people need and providing it," Oscar corrected, closing Ethan's workbook with satisfaction. With Ethan, he needs consistency, attention, and boundaries he can trust. Not so different from managing my organization. I stared at him. "Please tell me you're not comparing parenting my son to running a criminal enterprise." Oscar's smile was wicked. "I'm comparing leadership principles. Both require understanding motivation, establishing clear expectations, and following through on promises. Also, both occasionally require strategic deployment of rewards and consequences." Despite myself, I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in Oscar's presence without the shadow of fear or awkwardness threading through it, and something in his expression softened, the hard edges smoothing into something almost vulnerable. But the threat hadn't disappeared. I saw evidence of Oscar's other life in the conversations he conducted in rapid Russian from his study, door closed but voice occasionally rising with authority that made even Mikhail look nervous. In the way armed guards rotated shifts outside the penthouse entrance. And how Oscar's entire demeanor changed when certain phone calls came through, his body going still, eyes going cold, voice dropping into registers that suggested consequences for whoever was on the other end. One afternoon, I found Oscar teaching Ethan chess in the penthouse library. I'd expected a basic lesson in how pieces moved, maybe a simplified game to keep a 6-year-old's attention. Instead, I overheard Oscar explaining strategy with the same seriousness he'd use with an adult. "You must always think 3 moves ahead, Ethan. Anticipate what your opponent will do and have a plan for each possibility. The king is not the strongest piece, but he is the most important. Everything else exists to protect him." Ethan studied the board with furrowed concentration. "Like you protect Mom and me?" Oscar's hand stilled over a bishop he'd been repositioning. He glanced up, meeting my eyes across the library, and something passed between us, an acknowledgement of how thoroughly our lives had intertwined in just 7 days. "Exactly like that," Oscar said quietly. "Your mother is the queen, the most powerful piece on the board. You're the king, the most important. And I'm everything else. The knights and bishops and rooks whose only job is making sure nothing can touch you." "What happens if something gets past you?" Ethan asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Oscar's expression went dark. "Nothing gets past me, Ethan. That's a promise." Later, after Ethan had been sent to wash up for dinner, I confronted Oscar in that same library. "You can't make promises like that to him. You can't guarantee his safety absolutely." "Yes, I can." Oscar's certainty was absolute. "Because anyone who tries to hurt him will have to go through me first. And Dorothy, I've spent 20 years making sure that going through me is the last mistake anyone makes." The words should have terrified me. Instead, standing in that book-lined room with Chicago spreading dark and glittering beyond the windows, I felt safer than I had in 6 years. And that terrified me far more than anything else. 2 weeks into our arrangement, the lines between protection and partnership had blurred so completely I couldn't find them anymore. Oscar had business associates who required meetings at the penthouse, men in expensive suits who spoke in coded language about territories and arrangements and problems that had been resolved. I found myself playing hostess without consciously deciding to, pouring drinks I'd learned each man preferred, making polite conversation that skirted around the obvious criminality underlying every discussion, learning to read the subtle hierarchies and tensions in Oscar's world through body language and deference. They all assumed I was his. No one questioned my presence. And I never corrected them. Late one night, after Ethan had been asleep for hours and the penthouse had gone quiet except for the hum of the city beyond the windows, I found Oscar in his study reviewing documents that he closed the moment I entered. "We can't keep doing this." The words came out harsher than I'd intended. "Pretending this is temporary when Ethan is already calling you Mr. Oscar and asking if you're going to be his new dad. When your associates assume I'm your woman and I don't correct them. When I stopped, unable to articulate how I felt when Oscar touched me casually in passing, his hand at the small of my back when we walked through the penthouse, his fingers brushing mine when he handed me coffee he'd made exactly how I liked it. Unable to explain what happened inside me when he looked at me like I was something precious and dangerous at once. "When you what, Dorothy?" Oscar stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace. The air between us became charged, electric with everything we'd been carefully not acknowledging. "When I forget this is about protection and start wanting it to be about something else," I admitted, hating how vulnerable the truth made me. Oscar's hand cupped my face with surprising gentleness, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. "You think I'm pretending? You think the last 2 weeks have been an act for me? I think you're very good at controlling situations and making people feel safe. I think I'm a project that satisfies your need to save someone you couldn't save before." My voice cracked. "I think when the Kozlov threat is neutralized, you'll realize I'm just a broke teacher with a complicated kid and a history of bad decisions. That you can do better than someone whose life is held together with duct tape and determination." Oscar's laugh was low and without humor. "You think you're a charity case. Another broken thing I've collected. Aren't I? Dorothy." His thumb brushed across my lower lip, and I stopped breathing. "I've spent 2 weeks learning how you take your coffee, 1 sugar, cream until it's the color of sand. Memorizing the specific way you smile when Ethan says something unexpected, like your whole face lights up from the inside. Watching you grade papers at midnight because you refuse to give your students anything less than your full attention even when you're exhausted." His other hand found my waist, pulling me closer. "You're not a project. You're the first person in 10 years who's made me want something beyond power and survival." He kissed me then, fierce and claiming and nothing like gentle. I kissed back, pouring 2 weeks of tension and fear and unexpected connection into it. His hand slid into my hair while mine fisted in his shirt, and when we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I realized I'd stopped thinking about all the reasons this was impossible. "This is real," Oscar said against my lips, his forehead pressed to mine. "The protection is real. The danger is real. And what I feel for you is real. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept all of it." I thought about Ethan sleeping upstairs in his race car bed, safe in a way he'd never been in our old apartment. About Oscar teaching him chess and checking his homework and cracking exactly 3 inches of door space every night. About how I'd stopped flinching when armed guards nodded at me in hallways, stopped questioning the moral complexity of loving a man whose hands had blood on them. "I'm terrified," I whispered. "Good." Oscar's smile was dark and tender. "That means you understand what you're choosing. Now choose it anyway." So I did. The Kozlov threat came to a head on a Thursday when Viktor Kozlov himself reached out through intermediaries, requesting a meeting to discuss territorial boundaries and mutual interests. Oscar knew it was a trap. He told me as much while reviewing the message in his study, but refusing would signal weakness, and weakness in his world was an invitation for escalation. "I'm coming with you," I said when he started making preparations. Absolutely not. If I'm the excuse for this confrontation, I'm not hiding in your penthouse while you risk yourself. I crossed my arms. Besides, Victor wants to see if I'm worth the trouble I'm causing. Let him see. Oscar studied me for a long moment, then nodded with something that looked like pride. The warehouse sat in the south side, all concrete floors and industrial lighting and the smell of oil and rust. Viktor Kozlov stood in the center of the space, flanked by 4 men with weapons they made no attempt to conceal. He was older than I'd expected, late 50s with silver hair swept back from a face carved by violence and decades of cold calculation. His eyes were pale blue, the color of frozen lakes. "Mr. Bodrov," Victor said in heavily accented English. "And you brought your American teacher. How domesticated you've become. State your business, Victor." Oscar's voice was flat, dangerous, completely unlike the man who'd read Ethan bedtime stories last night. "My business is simple. You've been expanding into territories we've held for 2 years. Normally this would require aggressive negotiation." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But then we learned about your new weakness." His gaze slid to me. "A woman. A child. Such soft targets for a man in your position." I felt Oscar tense beside me, felt the violence coiling in him like a spring compressed to breaking. Before he could respond, I stepped forward, my voice shaking but holding. "If you're threatening my son, you should know that I'm a teacher. I've spent 6 years learning how to handle bullies who think fear makes them powerful. And I've learned that bullies are always, fundamentally, cowards." The warehouse went silent. Victor stared at me with something between surprise and grudging respect, while his men looked to him for direction that didn't come. "You think hiding behind a woman makes you strong, Bodrov?" "I think," Oscar said quietly, and there was murder in his voice, "that a woman brave enough to stand in a warehouse and call you a coward to your face has more strength than most of your soldiers. And I think you're about to learn why threatening her was the worst mistake you've made in a very long time." What followed was brutal negotiation conducted in English and Russian, with Oscar offering Victor certain routes into the city, shipping lanes and distribution networks I only half understood. In exchange, complete immunity for Dorothy Herzog and Ethan Herzog. Names never mentioned in Kozlov operations. No surveillance. No contact. Ever. Oscar backed the offer with evidence that made Victor's expression darken, photographs of Kozlov operations Oscar had infiltrated, recordings of conversations Victor thought were private, proof that allies Victor had counted on had already switched sides. The message was clear: Oscar was willing to concede ground to protect me, but anyone who actually touched me or Ethan would face consequences that made territorial disputes look like minor inconveniences. Victor recognized both the offer's value and the threat beneath it. He accepted with a curt nod, but before we could leave, he spoke to me directly. "You've made a dangerous choice, little teacher. Men like Oscar Bodrov don't retire to suburban houses with white fences. His world will always touch yours. Always bring shadows to your son's life. Are you truly prepared for that?" I met his frozen gaze without flinching. "I'm prepared to stand with someone who fights for me instead of running when things get complicated. So yes, I'm prepared." Victor's smile was almost approving. "Then perhaps you deserve each other after all." With the Kozlov threat neutralized, I'd allowed myself exactly 3 days of believing we were safe before Marcus proved me wrong. The court documents arrived via certified mail on a Monday morning, emergency petition for custody modification. Marcus was filing for full custody of Ethan, claiming I was cohabitating with a known criminal and willfully exposing a minor child to dangerous individuals involved in organized crime. The court date was set for 2 weeks out. I sat in Oscar's study, the papers shaking in my hands, feeling everything I'd built crumbling. "Everything I've done, leaving my old life, accepting your protection, it's all going to be used against me." Marcus knew exactly how to weaponize this. Oscar read the petition with clinical detachment, his expression revealing nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and absolutely terrifying. Then we use what I do best. We apply pressure until he breaks. Oscar, this is a legal proceeding. You can't just. Can't I? His smile was razor sharp. Dorothy, the law is a tool. Marcus is using it as a weapon against you. I'm simply going to make sure he understands that some weapons have consequences. Within 48 hours, Oscar's people had compiled a file on Marcus that made my stomach turn. Financial irregularities in his investment firm, client funds moved to accounts that shouldn't exist, trades executed with suspicious timing. An affair with a junior analyst named Stephanie that his fiancée Veronica didn't know about, documented with hotel receipts and text messages Oscar's investigators had somehow obtained. Evidence that Marcus had been hiding assets in offshore accounts, money that should have gone to child support payments he'd never made because I'd never formally filed for them. How did you get all this? I asked, staring at photographs of Marcus entering hotels with a woman who definitely wasn't Veronica. I have resources, Oscar said simply. And motivated employees who understand that protecting you is their primary directive. The meeting happened in the parking garage beneath Marcus's office building, not a warehouse this time, but somewhere Marcus would feel the violation of having his professional sanctuary invaded. I watched from Oscar's Mercedes as Mikhail and two other men I recognized from the penthouse security detail cornered Marcus between vehicles, cutting off any escape. Oscar exited the car with predatory grace, and I followed despite his gesture for me to stay. I needed to see this. Needed to witness the moment Marcus finally faced consequences. What the hell is this? Marcus demanded, but his voice wavered. Up close, I could see fear in his eyes, the same fear I'd seen when he'd confronted me about Oscar at the wedding. Oscar handed him a manila folder. You have two choices. You withdraw your custody petition, sign away all parental rights to Ethan, and disappear from Dorothy's life permanently. In exchange, the evidence of your embezzlement and infidelity stays private, and you get to keep your career and your engagement. Marcus opened the folder, and I watched color drain from his face as he flipped through pages documenting his crimes and indiscretions. And if I refuse? He tried to sound defiant but came off terrified. Then I make sure every client your firm has ever had knows you've been stealing from them. I make sure Veronica knows about your affair. I understand her father's law firm represents some very important people who value discretion. I make sure the IRS knows about your offshore accounts. Oscar stepped closer, and Marcus actually flinched. And Dorothy gets full custody anyway because you'll be too busy dealing with federal charges to fight her. Oscar leaned in, his voice dropping to something that made my skin prickle. But more than that, Marcus, you'll learn what it means to cross someone who doesn't play by legal rules. The garage you're standing in has no cameras, I made sure of that. The security guard has been paid to take an extended break. If you walk away right now, you walk away intact. Keep pushing, and we'll discover exactly how much physical persuasion it takes to change your mind. Marcus signed the documents within an hour. I watched him do it, this man who'd abandoned me pregnant and spent 6 years pretending Ethan and I were inconvenient mistakes he'd successfully avoided. I felt no triumph, only bone-deep relief that my son would never again be used as a weapon in Marcus's ego battles. After Marcus left, practically running to his car, Oscar found me sitting in the Mercedes, staring at the signed papers that terminated his parental rights forever. Did I just become the kind of person who solves problems through threats and violence? I asked quietly. Oscar slid into the seat beside me, his hand covering mine. You became the kind of mother who protects her child using every resource available. Sometimes that means the legal system. Sometimes it means me. There's no shame in accepting that the world isn't fair and using unfair advantages to protect what matters. I looked at him, this dangerous man who'd threatened Marcus with physical violence and federal charges in the same breath, who'd eliminated every threat to my son with ruthless efficiency. "I love you," I said, and meant it completely. Oscar's expression softened. "I know. Now let's go home." A month after the wedding where everything changed, Oscar hosted a private dinner at his newest restaurant, an upscale establishment in River North called Bodrov's that I'd learned he'd opened specifically to have a legitimate venue for important occasions. The irony wasn't lost on me, a criminal enterprise funding a legal business that would host our engagement announcement. He'd invited a carefully selected group, my sister Emma and her husband David, Ethan dressed in a miniature suit that made him look impossibly grown up, Mikhail and his wife Katia, and two of Oscar's most trusted associates with their families. The evening had the surface appearance of normalcy, exceptional food, wine that probably cost more than my old monthly rent, conversation about mundane topics like Chicago's unpredictable weather and school registration deadlines. But I could feel the weight of unspoken significance in how Oscar kept glancing at me, how Mikhail kept smiling like he knew a secret, how even Ethan seemed to vibrate with barely contained excitement. After dessert was served, a chocolate creation that made Ethan's eyes go wide, Oscar stood and tapped his wine glass. The room went quiet immediately, that instinctive deference to his authority that I'd learned was both earned and expected. "I asked you all here tonight because you're the people who matter most to me and Dorothy. You've witnessed how our lives have intertwined over the past month. Some of you," he glanced at Mikhail, who grinned, "thought I was crazy for bringing civilians into my world. Some thought Dorothy was crazy for accepting my protection." He turned to me, and his expression carried vulnerability I'd never seen before, not even in our most intimate moments. "A month ago, I saw a woman standing alone at a wedding, trying to disappear while everyone who should have valued her treated her like a cautionary tale. I approached her because I recognized someone who'd been told her strength was weakness, her independence was failure, her love for her son was a burden to carry alone." Oscar moved to stand beside my chair, and my heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear him over the rush of blood in my ears. "Dorothy, I told you that night that I don't do anything halfway. I meant it. This isn't me offering you temporary protection until the next threat appears. This isn't me keeping you around until the novelty wears off. This is me asking you to build a life with me, understanding that my life includes danger, moral complexity, and shadows that will always touch the edges of whatever we create." He produced a small velvet box, but instead of opening it immediately, he set it on the table in front of me. "I'm not going to propose with flowers and promises of normal suburban happiness. That's not what I can offer. What I can offer is this: I will protect you and Ethan with everything I have and everything I am. I will burn this city down before I let anyone hurt what's mine. I will be the father Ethan deserves and the partner you've earned. And I will never, ever make you feel like your worth depends on anything other than exactly who you are." He finally opened the box, revealing a ring that stole my breath, an emerald-cut diamond set in platinum, flanked by two smaller stones that caught the candlelight like captured stars. "The center stone is for you. The ones on either side represent Ethan and me. 3 people becoming a family." Oscar's voice roughened. "Will you marry me, Dorothy? Will you let me protect you forever?" I looked at the ring, at Oscar's face where hope and certainty warred for dominance, at my son watching with wide excited eyes, at my sister crying happily into David's shoulder. I thought about the woman I'd been a month ago, lonely, ashamed, convinced I'd used up my chance at love when I'd chosen my child over Marcus's approval. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. "Yes, I'll marry you." Oscar slid the ring onto my finger, a perfect fit, because of course he'd somehow gotten my size exactly right, and Ethan cheered loudly enough that the entire restaurant could hear. When Oscar kissed me, claiming and gentle at once, I realized this was what it meant to be truly seen. Not pitted. Not tolerated. But valued for exactly who I was, complications and all. Later, after Ethan had fallen asleep in the car on the drive back to the penthouse, Oscar carried him upstairs while I followed. We tucked my son into the race car bed together, and it struck me that this moment, domestic and ordinary and perfect, existed in the same world as warehouses and threats and dangerous negotiations. "Are you afraid?" Oscar asked when we were alone on the terrace overlooking the lake, Chicago's lights spreading below us like a promise. "Terrified," I admitted. "Of your world. Of failing Ethan. Of not being enough for what you need." "Good." Oscar pulled me close, and I felt his heartbeat steady against my cheek. "Fear means you understand the stakes. But Dorothy, you stood in a warehouse and called Victor Kozlov a coward. You accepted my protection knowing it came with costs. You're exactly enough. You always have been." I leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, hearing the steady rhythm of his heart. A month ago I was invisible. Now I was claimed by Chicago's most dangerous man. A month ago I was alone. Now I was building a family in the shadows. "I love you," I whispered. "I know," Oscar replied. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret being brave enough to let me love you back." 1 month. That's all it took for Dorothy C. Herzog's world to transform completely. For a chance encounter at a wedding to become a lifetime commitment. For a dangerous man to become the father my son needed and the partner I deserved. For loneliness to transform into belonging. And standing on that terrace with Oscar's arms around me and my son sleeping safely nearby, I finally understood, sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the most redemptive. Sometimes love requires accepting shadows along with light. Sometimes happily ever after includes bodyguards and blood on hands and moral complexity that can't be resolved with easy answers. But it also includes fierce protection, chosen family, and the revolutionary act of believing you're worth fighting for. And that, I decided, was more than enough. This story argues that life requires strategic risk-taking, that authentic connection is worth vulnerability, and that we are defined not by what happens to us but by how we choose to respond. The opposite of courage isn't cowardice, it's invisibility. We can hide from danger, but we can't hide from ourselves. True survival means choosing when to be seen, what to fight for, and who to trust with the truth of who we are. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing we can do is exactly what saves us. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought. Your comments and support fuel these stories and help me bring you more content like this. Share this with someone who loves a good romance with danger, redemption, and real emotion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose love even when it's terrifying.